It's the afternoon drive with Nick Farabuagh and Alan Saunders. No Smitty today, Alan. I think this is rare. I think this might be the second time it's been you and me doing this. Old time's sake, it's like draft talk, isn't it?
It is like draft talk. Smitty's in the trunk. Yeah, he's off today, and I was not off today. I was at the South Side. I'm actually still on the South Side, just leaving the South Side after Omar and Mike Tomlin's annual pre-draft. Well, let's call it what it is. It wasn't really a press conference. It's an attempt to speak to the media for 30 minutes without telling us anything of actual substance. And I got to say, Omar Khan is not only a very good general manager, he's very good at that too, man. It was not a lot going on in this press conference today.
I didn't glean much of anything from it. There were a few things that perked your ears up and maybe hinted you in the right direction, but very little new information. I feel like I knew most of this from either the combine or the owners' meetings, Alan. Really, two pieces of info that I thought were kind of new were Mike Tomlin's thoughts on the wide receiver room, and then, in my opinion, the trade down thoughts. But let's start off with the big picture one. And Mike Tomlin actually said in his opening statement, you didn't even have to prompt him for probably what was the biggest piece of, I guess, pie that you got today, which was saying that they are not, quote unquote, overly thirsty for any one position, meaning that they are going to go BPA at a position of need. I think Omar Khan said that exact phrase actually later in the press conference. So this is exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be BPA at a position of need. What did you kind of glean from that, and where does that kind of point you at 20th overall?
Well, yeah, I think the big kind of thing is that for different reasons, I think the Steelers are not sweating their giant gaping depth chart holes at center and wide receiver. And obviously, those are my words, not theirs, because they're not going to call the players that they have right now giant gaping holes. But let's be honest about what they are. They don't have a legitimate starting center. They don't have a legitimate number 2 wide receiver. You could argue that they might not even have a legitimate number 3 wide receiver. And so those are big needs. In fact, we've called them on this podcast musts, not needs. But it sure seems like the Steelers are not treating them as first-round musts, that they're not talking about those positions like they absolutely have to address one of them with pick number 20 on Thursday night. And I think the reasons for that are a little bit different. I think the center position, what Omar Khan has said is that he's comfortable with the internal options. And by internal options, the only reasonable internal option is Nate Herbig. And look, Nate Herbig's okay. I don't think he would be awful if he had to play. I question whether the Steelers actually believe he's a better center than Mason Cole, because if they actually believe that, why on earth didn't he play last year? But I think, in general, I think the Steelers are comfortable with just waiting on a center. I mean, remember, this is a team that in 2021 waited until the 4th round to get their starting center. Obviously, that didn't work, but I get some of the same vibes from a team that is just like, yeah, we'll figure it out. I don't think they place the level of importance on the center position that a lot of the fan base does. This is a franchise with a proud history at the center position. I think a lot of people, because of that, think pretty highly of the center position here in Pittsburgh compared to maybe around the NFL. I think a lot of football people would tell you center is the least important position on the offensive line. It might be the least important starting position on the entire offense. So I think at center, I don't want to say they don't have a need, but I think it's a need they're not worried about. It's also a deep class with guys, even into day 3, that I think project as eventual starters, if not day 1 starters. So that's center. Wide receiver, I think, on the other hand, I think it's just so deep that they're sure they'll get one somewhere, right? I think that's the other part. And Mike Tomlin's talking about Puka Nacua and how he was a 5th-round pick last year and became, a all-rookie candidate at wide receiver, and how you can get productive wide receivers anywhere. I mean, nobody specifically asked him about the tackle position, but what's sort of unsaid there is that's. I mean, that's the be. It's really hard to get the draft board to fall where tackle is not BPA, and it's obviously also a position of need. So my big picture takeaway is I'm leaning tackle even a little harder than I was 24 hours ago. What did you think?
Yeah, I really look at the tackle position, and I kind of think honestly, Alan, that is where BPA is going to be, just because Amarius Mims, for example, who I think is probably the guy that's been connected the most with the Steelers for months and is probably the likeliest to be there um, at 20th overall. I really think that he could easily be BPA there. I also think, we heard today Troy Fautanu with knee issues. He could potentially be someone that is there. Corner is another one that I could think about maybe being the BPA there. If Terrion Arnold falls or someone like that falls, but tackle feels like the BPA unless, and I think the big kind of exception to tackle and or corner being BPA, and I still don't. I know they showed a lot of interest in corner. I can't buy corner in round one. It seems like it's a need, but it's not a need on the level of the other three, or at least it's not as hard to address. So I look at it and I say tackle makes sense, but I think the exception to this is probably Graham Barton. I think he is the exception to it. And what I would point to is literally when Mike Tomlin was asked what it takes to translate the center from guard and or tackle, said football intellect and center in their background in some manner. I mean, he described Graham Barton, which is interesting. It doesn't mean they're going to pick him, but I did perk my ears up at that. So I think Graham Barton might be the guy that is kind of floating around here, but I mean, I guess Brian Thomas has to be considered there too, but haven't shown a ton of tangible interest. I think, tackle, we've talked about it. Fautanu, Mims, Fuaga, Latham. I think one of those four is there. I think Mims versus Barton's the most interesting of those debates. But I do think, Barton is kind of the one that could throw the curveball and all of that.
I also wonder, where the Steelers project Barton to be. Are they saying he's the center internally, or are they saying something else, or are they saying he could be more than just a center? There was a good chart put on Twitter by, I want to say it was, I don't want to say it was the wrong guy. I think it was Nick from Over the Cap.
I believe it was Jason from Over the Cap.
Okay, it was Jason from Over the Cap. About basically what positions provide you the most value in the first round. Center's dead last, except for punter, kicker, and long snapper. But, and that's one of the big reasons why, even though center's been a need, I've been really, really hesitant to say the Steelers are going to take one, because I think the ability to find value is probably Omar Khan's greatest strength as general manager. So I really don't see him doing something like that. And but I wonder if they see Graham Barton as a guy that they could draft and play as a center, but wouldn't have to stay there, depending on the way the team needs go. Or they could draft him in the center they could draft him in the first round and then see what's there in the second round. Hey, maybe it's Zach Frazier and we think Graham Barton's a tackle. Oh, maybe it's Kingsley Sumatea, and we think that Graham Barton's a center now. Give them that flexibility. If they think he can be more than just a center, maybe they'll play him at center for 1 year and then move him to guard to replace James Daniels. I don't know. If they think he's more than just a center, I think that really changes the math about drafting him in the first round. Because, look, I mean, one of the big things you get out of a first-round pick is that fifth-year option. But you have to remember, all the fifth-year options for offensive linemen run together. So you're not paying a center the average of the top salaries at the center position. You're paying them the average of the top salaries of all the offensive line position. And the tackles and the guards make more. So you don't really get very good value from drafting a center for that reason. But if that's a guy that can also play other positions, then I think it becomes a lot more realistic in terms of the value for the slot.
I also think the run scheme they run, the wide zone scheme specifically, puts a particular onus on the center position. just because you
Especially
need
the
athletic.
athleticism of it.
Yes, I think that's the other thing. And I think the other unique thing that is in this draft is we have seen the Steelers show interest in only two mid-round centers in Hunter Norzad and Mason McCormick. I would imagine they're projecting McCormick as a center. That's where I'm guessing that they're kind of projecting him as. But we haven't seen them, look that much at Cedric Van Pran, Dom Puny, Tanner Bortolini. They have seen some of these guys at different stops, but we haven't really seen them hit it hard. So it makes me wonder. So say they do go tackle at 20, they go Mims or Fautanu or whoever is there. I think what this kind of points to, Alan, is maybe they won't take maybe they won't take center in the first round, but what will happen is they will move up the board from 51, which is what I think is still a very possible kind of outcome. Especially with the trade down. We haven't talked about this yet. Omar basically shunning the trade down stuff for a large degree. So, unless the board is just awful for them. And I think you and I would agree it's just really hard to see them, all the tackles off the board. Maybe Thomas isn't there, and you have all of the corners that they would like off the board. Like it seems really hard, even if all the
You can't
tackle.
even make up that board. Like there has to be a tackle, Graham Barton, or one of the top corners. Like it's just not even feasible.
If by chance Arnold, Mitchell, all of the tackles and Barton were off the board, would they still not stick at 20 and draft Cooper DeJean or someone like that? Like that's what I'm kind of thinking of, and I just have a hard time thinking he'd also be off the board, or if those guys are off the board, okay, Brian Thomas might be there, or something crazy will happen.
Like to do that, like Brock Bowers has to be there, which is like at that point maybe you just take him. That is though. I think the trade down scenario maybe starts to get realistic if you have just someone that no one expects to be there falling, and that's when teams really will pay up to move up. But I have a tough time seeing that play out.
Yeah, I do too. So I think they're going to stick at 20, and if that is a tackle, which it's very possible it is, I'm still not sure exactly which one they're going to draft. I still think that, I think I have my top three candidates. I haven't dwindled it down completely yet, but kind of combining these comments with their trails of crumbs and the unlikeliness now that I think they're going to trade back after Omar's comments today. I don't know if you would agree with this, Alan, but I think my top three likeliest picks for them at 20 would be Barton, Mims, and Fautanu. That's what I would say. And I'm not sure if Fautanu is going to be there at 20. If he is, we've done some debates of Mims versus Barton. I do think Troy Fautanu supersedes all of them and would be the pick.
I agree with that. Smitty and I last week talked about, I said about like 35% Mims, 30% Barton. I think the news that Fautanu could fall, it does open the possibility that he could be there, I think to maybe a greater degree than I had been considering. But then again, you also have to wonder what the Steelers' medical opinion of him is. And does the fact that they don't necessarily scout the West Coast that heavily play into their own hesitancy to pick a guy with injury concerns? Like they have not done as much homework on Fautanu as other teams have, just because they don't like at Georgia. They were more than willing to go take George Pickens and Darnell Washington when those were guys that were falling down the board because of injury concerns. But the Steelers do a ton of work at Georgia, and that's why they felt comfortable in that evaluation. Will they feel the same level of comfort to make that evaluation in a West Coast guy? I don't know. It's interesting. I think I would, just based on the tape, prefer Fautanu to any of the other players. But you have to wonder if he does fall, what is the reason for it? And, will the Steelers be the team that is more likely to be the one to want to take a chance on him?
Yeah, I think that's the question, obviously, with him. So, we kind of beat down this first round conversation where I think we kind of think it's going to be a tackle or Graham Barton. I think that's where it is. And I think they're going to think of Graham Barton as a center. That's my guess, just based on historical thresholds from the Steelers and what Andy Weidel drafted and kind of molded in Philadelphia. Usually they anticipate guys having long arms. Also, I just don't think the tape for Barton is conducive for sticking out wide at tackle. I do think he's an interior lineman. So I'm
I
guessing they
think the
do
one
him
thing the
instead.
versatility there does get you, though, is if you draft him, let's say they draft Barton at 20, and then Frazier falls to 51.
Yeah.
Maybe you could pick them both and then say, okay, we'll try Barton to tackle year one. If it doesn't work, maybe we'll move him to guard in year two, and then we'll go address tackle again. I think it does leave you like some level of flexibility to take advantage of a good board later on.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you could say the same about Fautanu, just because of the
Yeah,
talk, but maybe
absolutely,
five position versatile.
absolutely. Yeah, if
So
Fautanu is the pick at 20 and Jordan Morgan falls to 51, well then okay, like you go right back to it and you're playing Fautanu at center this year, and if center doesn't look like it's his best spot, then guard the following year.
yeah, I think it's a good place for them to be in. I don't think also, and one thing I do just want to say, I don't think you should take many of the words they said at face value. I'm certain they know they need a center, they need a wide receiver, all of that. I saw a little bit of panic around, oh my goodness, Mike Tomlin, and I want to get to this next. Mike Tomlin saying that he likes the trajectory that this wide receiver room is on. Really, Alan, I think it's not as much talking about who they have there right now, but who he sees in the draft, and still a decent pool of wide receivers out in free agency to where if the board doesn't fall well for them, they would be okay going out and signing someone after the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think it pretty well explains like the Tyler Boyd process, right? Where they're like, "Hey, we would like to have you, but we don't think we need you. And so here's our best offer, and if you don't like it, that's fine. We'll talk again in May." I just think it makes that process make a little sense if their stance is, yeah, we're gonna get a good wide receiver in this draft, pretty much no matter what, at least one, maybe more than one.
I do, and so I do think this lessens the Thomas chatter. Dane Brugler did say today he knows the Steelers quote unquote love Brian Thomas Jr. And Peter Schrager's mocked him there. There's been a few mocks. Jonathan Jones, CBS Sports Insider, has also mocked him to the Steelers. It's been a little bit interesting. Obviously, the cookie crumbs are not as heavy towards Thomas as they are towards these tackles or Barton or someone like that. But it's interesting to note. But the real kind of area where it coalesces for receiver interest is at 51 and later, where we're talking about the Pearsalls, the Legettes, the Corleys, McCaffrey, all of these guys, Roman Wilson. There's just a lot of those names, Alan. And I think what Mike Tomlin is saying here is, listen, we could get a guy at 51, we could get a guy at 84, and still, you talked about Tyler Boyd's being out there. There are names out there that can supplement this group. Just in free agency, DJ Chark is out there. Michael Thomas is still out there. OBJ is still out there. All of those guys, some of them are flashier names. Depends on what they would take, but there are options. And there's more options there than there are, say, center, which is just barren. So I think that's more of what he's talking about there with the trajectory of the room, which, okay, they maybe have to wait till 98 and it doesn't fall well and they get McCaffrey or something. They could still go out and add somebody. But there's a really talented
The other
group.
thing at wide receiver is like, unlike center, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that like I think Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson are great, but they actually did go get veteran guys that have done the job. I mean, Van's been a wide receiver too. Quez has been a wide receiver 3. Do I think they should be that for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2024? No, but at least you have legitimate NFL players that have done the job you might be asking them to do on the depth chart as we sit here today, which is more than you can say for the center position.
Yeah, and listen, I do think receiver is very important for them because particularly what they need, and this is going to be a weird comment, but they need a blocking hoss. Like, they don't have one on the roster right now. What Puka brought to the table for LA that made him so kind of invaluable, other than obviously just the highly acrobatic catches, body control, his ability to separate, all of that, was his ability to really be a special chess piece in the run game. Digging out safeties and doing things like that. Arthur Smith needs a guy like that. I'm not sure they have a guy that does it consistently. I think Van Jefferson is probably the closest they have to it right now, but go out and get a guy. Pearsall can do that. Jalen Polk can do that. Just a guy like that. I think they really need somebody that can really, really like be a piece for them that is a threat, both in the run game, spread in line, and then can win over the middle of the field off those crossing routes. I think there's a number of guys that can do that, and so that's what they really need in this draft out of that receiver. I think it's obviously hard to see them. I mean, goodness gracious, Puka Nacua in the 5th round is one of the best 5th round picks probably we've seen in recent memory. But can they get a guy in the 2nd round and not panic about it for not getting him in the first? I think they can. I
Even
really
third
do.
round, I would not I would not be worried if they do not have a wide receiver and they're going to the 3rd round with picks at 84 and 98. Like I think they can make that work.
I don't love that kind of vein of receivers. I mean, I don't know who's going to be there, but is McMillan going to be there? Is Corley going to be there? I'm not a big fan of Tez Walker. Who's
Yeah, I'm
probably
not
going to be
not
one.
particularly high on him. Jermaine Burton, I guess, depends on. Now, there's a guy with some off the field concerns that like the Steelers may trust their evaluation more than other teams because it is Alabama, a school they do a ton of business with, and so that may be a place where they go. I still think even in the even the 4th round, like I like Jamari Thrash, um, I like Johnny Wilson, I like McCaffrey. Like I think there's good players all the way down in this draft. I'm not saying those guys are Puka, but I think they're playable year one guys.
I think they can be playable year one, but I would like personally, I would like a veteran and a draft pick. I think that's where I would feel most comfortable because let's be real here, with the quarterbacks you have in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, you're going to be taking a lot of sacks, so you're naturally going to be thrown into 11 personnel a decent bit just because of that. So I do feel like they should have 3 guys that they can really trust there at receiver. So if they go 1st round, I think 1st round's offensive line. It's pointing that way. Wide receivers down the board a little bit. Doesn't feel like they're going to trade back a ton, Allen. But linebacker's kind of this albatross of a position that I don't think a lot of people are factoring in to the draft plans. But Steelers have shown a lot of interest in these linebackers. Aaron Curry's been all around the block. Junior Colson came in. Peyton Wilson came in. So there's been a number of guys that have they've shown interest in. And Cole Holcomb, we don't really know what's going on with Cole Holcomb and kind of where he's going to be at by training camp start of the season. So linebacker might be a sneaky, top 5 pick need for them before the end of that 4th round.
I think linebacker is a lot higher on their board than most fans think, just based on their visits, the amount of scouting that Aaron Curry did, the quality of player that they talked to. Combine formal with Edgerrin Cooper, had dinner with Jeremiah Trotter before his pro day. Like they talked to all of the best linebackers in this class and did so extensively. That's not a smokescreen. The Steelers aren't a big. I know what Mike Tomlin said today about trying to throw people off. The Steelers are not a big smokescreen team in general. That they're really not going to go through that amount of effort to disguise their level of interest. Like it's pretty clear to me they want to add a linebacker in this draft, and are certainly making noise like they want to do it early. I question whether that's necessary. But look, the Cole Holcomb thing is to the point that it's getting weird. Like I saw Cole Holcomb walking around the locker room looking mostly fine in January. His injury was the first week in November? Like it's April. It's mid-April. Like they should at least at this point be able to sit here and say he is or is not going to be ready for the start of OTAs. He is or is not going to be ready for the start of training camp. Like that should not be a question anymore. Now, are they just telling us so little that they don't even want to tell us that? I mean, I guess it's possible, right? Where they know and they're just not saying. But it is strange to have this continued level of uncertainty. And really, like, if you look at the linebacker room, being unsure about Cole Holcomb is the only reason to want to draft a linebacker that high. They just spent a lot of money on Patrick Queen. Landon Roberts had a great year, and he's on a reasonable contract. I think they could probably extend him if they wanted to. Seem to really like it in Pittsburgh. Mark Robinson, I mean, look, he wasn't ready when they needed him to be, but I thought he played better by the end of the year. Like, do they need another body there? Sure, but the depth chart with Cole Holcomb in it doesn't look like they need to be addressing linebacker before the 6th round. It certainly seems like that's their intention. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. It doesn't make a lot of sense unless there is something concerning about Cole Holcomb's injury status.
Yeah, I think that's listen. It's the only position you could argue they would focus on it because Roberts is on an expiring contract, and maybe Holcomb isn't going to be kind of the same player. That's fine, but then as we have talked about here, why aren't they focusing on guards more? If you're worried about James Daniels being on an expiring deal, they aren't focusing on that. Why aren't they focusing on safeties more? All these positions can be kind of clumped in. If Holcomb was healthy, that's
tight end. Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah.
Last year, his deal.
Right. And so, that's where if Holcomb was healthy, those positions you would feel like actually be kind of on the same level, but they're showing.
Yeah, I would. That's right. If Holcomb was healthy, I would consider guard, linebacker, tight end, and safety to all be about pretty equal and near the bottom of their needs, but all like, oh, you could make a case to pick one of these, but their interest is extremely tilted towards linebacker of those 4 positions.
Absolutely. And so, I think it was a serious injury to Cole Holcomb. And it seems like, we'll kind of see. For example, another thing, you talk about with how uncertain they were with what Cole Holcomb did. It certainly sounded like they were very upbeat about Corey Trice being ready, right? We saw him actually training in photos last week when he was asked about what I think Omar said about Corey Trice, that he's getting better. He's on the right track. So certainly seems like there's a lot of optimism with Corey Trice. So why wouldn't they just say the same thing with Cole Holcomb?
Right.
Definitely some concerning things. My guess is if he's back in like the middle of training camp. That seems like what is going to be.
It sure seems like if he was going to be ready for the start of OTAs in, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, that they would be telling us that he was, right? There's no reason, if they knew that, for them to not say that. So it doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah, and so I think it's concerning, certainly. And if he is injured and not going to be ready for the season, then they absolutely need another linebacker. I really do believe that. It's a bad class, though. We've talked about that a few times. It is not a good class. So really, they have to either address this in the first 5 picks, or they're not going to get the insurance they want. But there are a few names. Cedric Gray, I think that I really like. Trevin Wallace is a little raw. If you're going to get depth, for a guy like if you're going for immediate depth, you probably want a guy, in my opinion, that does have a little bit of upside. I don't necessarily want a squeaky clean linebacker, just because Cole Holcomb I do believe is going to be back at some point this year. So I want a guy that I can develop into a higher ceiling. So, I don't want a guy like, for example, I would like a guy like Cedric Gray, who, while I can kind of put him into an easy role right away, he has upside to be 3-down linebacker.
Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe like something like James Williams, who played safety in college, but seems like he might be a linebacker in the NFL, could be an option as well, because you're making that projection, and he's probably only going to do one thing well at the beginning, but that's the opposite one thing well that Mark Robinson does, so that's kind of natural fit too.
Yeah, it really is. Last position, I think that they kind of touched on a little bit here just by talking with Corey Trice and Darius Rush's corner. And where this kind of fits in. It seems like I think they even agree with the fact that the top 4 needs are pretty clearly center, OT, wide receiver, and corner. I think that kind of shows itself out to be that. I'll tell you what, I think that is the toughest thing to kind of peg in this class. Where the heck do they get the corner? It could be as early as if the board falls wrong in the first round, and it could be as late as the 6th. I don't know when they're going to draft their cornerback, but that's kind of interesting to me, where they kind of get the corner, because they've shown interest up and down the board, again, from round 1 to round 6.
And the other interesting part of this is, with Omar saying pretty much that they're not going to trade back unless it's like the worst board imaginable. Like we've talked about this, something has to go. They've got, something has to at least fall into the 6th round, right? Whether it's wide receiver, corner, center, tackle, defensive tackle, linebacker, right? That's 6 needs. They only have 5 picks from the first 4 rounds. Something has to fall into the 6th round. Is it linebacker? I think that's what a lot of people doing mock drafts have done and moved defensive tackle up the board. Could it be corner? Just because I think if you look at the value clusters, I think there is a nice value cluster in defensive tackle in the 4th round. I think maybe cornerbacks could fall later. They talked to all those 3 local guys, right? Devonshire from Pitt, Bishop from West Virginia, Hardy from Penn State. I feel like those are 6th round guys. And so I think there's a chance that they wait very long to get their cornerback.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I can literally peg you every single round a guy they have shown interest in. They, first round, Wiggins and DeJean. 2nd round, Melton or Sanderstill. 3rd round, Andrew Phillips. 4th round, Renardo Green. 6th round, those local guys. I mean, it's all up and over the place. I have no idea what they're going to do there. It's going to be interesting. And they also mentioned, they're not really operating like Patrick Peterson or Shannon Sullivan or on the team. It's the right way to go about it. But I think even they have to acknowledge that if they don't land a slot corner early, they can easily call up one of those 2 guys. And I still think if you're talking about those major 4 needs, the one that's most likely to get pushed out of the top ranking is going to be corner.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really feel like, honestly, it's center, tackle, and wide receiver on one tier, and kind of cornerback on its own with D tackle, and then maybe just based on the Steelers and the Holcomb uncertainty, you could put linebacker with D tackle there. But I think that's kind of the way it falls for me, is that if I'm like, to me, like, the one thing I guess about tackle is that if you don't get one early, like maybe you just don't go there at all. Like maybe if you go through the first 2 rounds and you don't get one, maybe you just take a pass on tackle and like resign yourself to Dan Moore playing this year and using your 1st round pick on a tackle next year. Because after the 1st round, it starts to become, I guess after the 2nd round, it starts to become pretty unlikely that you're going to get anybody that's going to unseat Dan Moore anyway. But, man, I don't know. Like, I think I could see, like, it's really hard for me to see them getting out of day 2 without having a center, a tackle, and wide receiver. It feels like that's really the way things are trending.
I'd agree with that. And the reason I would agree with that is, as we talked about with corner, there's round 1 through 6 interest. In tackle, there's really round 1 and round 3 interest because you have Gonsalves and Fisher in that round 3. Center, same thing, because you have McCormick and Norzad, who are probably going to go 98, 110, 119, somewhere around there. And then you look at receiver and same thing, right? You have the interest up and down the board, but I still think they are gearing up for a potential double dip at wide receiver. When you created your tiers, Alan, you almost might put the 3 you had, tackle, center, and receiver, and then almost put corner and then receiver with corner again, because that could be a thing that they do. Would not surprise me at all if they draft one at 51 and then double up at like 119 or with the 1 to 6th. That could definitely be a possibility. So you almost have to double up receiver. So it's kind of interesting to me when you look at it, but you look at like the 30 visits, the combine formals, the corner's the one they've had the most flexibility with up and down the board. And really tackle
wide receiver also, but like I agree that some of that could be looking at guys to be a 2nd wide receiver in the class.
I think so. But you look at tackle and the interest like shuts off at the end of day 2. Like they didn't talk to any of the day 3 tackles. Like we haven't seen a lot of interest in like Delmar Glaze, Javon Foster, Christian Jones, guys like that. We have seen interest in the first round guys, Fisher, Gonsalves. I guess you could throw Rosengarten in there because Pat Meyer was at his pro day. I still think that was probably more of a Fautanu trip, but Rosengarten was there too. So you kind of pick up little things there as well. So really, Alan, I mean, to sum up this press conference, we're talking in circles again, and Omar and Mike didn't give much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much like the main theme here. I do think overall, slightly more. I think slightly more likely to be tackled than I thought before, and I think that combined with the news of the day with Fautanu, that maybe I think I would significantly increase his chances of being that first round pick, and then the news about it really felt like that was a pretty strong answer that they're not going to trade down out of 20. And I think that's really the big takeaways there for me. So when Smitty and I gave our percentages, I said 35 Mims, 30, what did I say? 35 Mims, 30 Barton, 25 Field, 10 trade down. I'll go move trade down to 0 and maybe give Troy Fautanu about 15% and cut the rest of the field down.
Yeah, I'm pretty on board with that. With you, anything else you got, Alan?
I think that's it, man. Lots of content at SteelersNow.com. Go check it out. And tomorrow, I don't want to overhype this, but I don't want to underhype it. We're expecting a very large guest with me and Smitty on Steelers Afternoon Drive. Let's just say that.
Yeah, check tomorrow for the show. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. You can find me on X at FarabuaghFB. You can find Alan at what is A underscore is it A Saunders?
A Saunders underscore PGH.
Yes, that's what it is. It's A Saunders underscore PGH. Make sure to read all the stuff at SteelersNow.com. Smitty and Alan will be in there with a very large co-pilot tomorrow. Thanks for watching.